Hello, and thank you for checking out this message from Grace Church San Diego. Now think through your life. What story will be told about you after you're gone? Moses was just a man, but he, like you and I, was called to be a part of something bigger than himself. God often uses those who are ordinary to lead, to guide, and to influence. In this series, we will sift through the struggle of rising up to God's calling to see the beautiful adventure it is to step into your purpose. We'd love to hear how Grace Church is affecting your life. So please send an email to info@gracesd.com with your story. Or if you'd like to help support our ministry financially, you can visit the website below so we can continue to help people find Christ and become His mature followers.
Beginning this series on how God makes a leader. And so I thought we'd start with one of my favorite heroes that's a leader. His name is Michael Scott, who is a self-proclaimed world best boss. Now, I don't know if you know the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company story, but Michael Scott, he's a great salesman, and that's pretty much about it. He lacks every other skill necessary to be a leader or even a manager. Jim Halpert, who works for Michael, says that Michael spends 80% of his time distracting other people who work for him. He spends 19% of his time procrastinating on what he's supposed to get done, and maybe 1% actually critically thinking about how to make things better. Michael was asked, would he rather be feared or loved? He said, easy, both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me. That's, fear-based leadership, not so much. And, sometimes we have to look at what you don't want to be in order to figure out what you do want to be. But we still love you, Michael. We are talking about Moses. And he is this man with the red dot, with all of these people following him. He was a man who led the Jewish people, the Israelite nation, out of bondage and slavery into a place of freedom. How did God shape Moses? How did he make him into a leader? I love studying leadership, organizational leadership in particular. I love reading books of how to organize things in such a way where they're moving and shaking and accomplishing things and succeeding. But what about leadership by faith? What is faith? Faith is something that we all have. The question is not, do you have faith? Because we all have faith. The question is, what is the object of your faith? For some people, they place their primary faith in science, in the scientific process. I actually have faith in the scientific process as well. But I believe that it complements a faith in God, that, oh, you're studying that, and that's what it's telling you it's true. Well, it's pointing to the one that made it happen. Some people place their faith in themselves alone. They believe that they are able within themselves. They have the power within themselves to get done, to accomplish, to be everything necessary within themselves. Some people place their faith in political or social leaders for their hope and for their future, for a sense of their purpose. The question is not, do you have faith? Because wherever you are at in your relationship with God or your spiritual journey, discovering, maybe seeking God, you need to know we all have faith. The question is, what is the object, or who is the object of your faith? Faith is like a clutch on a car. There actually is no power in the clutch. All the power is in the engine, right? It's all about what the clutch is connected to. You see, who or what your faith is connected to is what you draw power from, whether you can put your finger on it or not. It's not about the size of the clutch. It's about the size of the engine. It's not about how big your faith is. It's how big your God is that allows you to have a power and a strength in your life. Hebrews 11 puts it this way. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Assurance, not in this kind of pie in the sky, kind of vague optimism like pixie dust, this universal concept that people are trying to figure out, this vagueness, but in a God who is shown up in real space and time on this earth. A conviction, I love that word, like conviction of of how to think and to act based on what you know to be true about God. And for some of us, that may be very little. For some of us, it may be more. Sometimes the more you know, the harder it is. Anyways, but a conviction to say, what I know and what I believe, I'm gonna think and act based on that. Faith in God is less like following an IKEA instruction manual where it gives you like the step-by-step process, and then you get to the end and you're like, there's some pieces left over. It's okay, it's gonna fall apart. It's more like developing a love relationship. And you get to that point where you make these promises to each other, these vows on the altar. It's more like that. It's in these bare promises that God has told us that we choose to believe. How about this one in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 16? God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. What an amazing reward. How about if you took just this one promise? I just found one. They're all over the place. God is not ashamed to be your God. He knows what you've done, where you've been. He's not ashamed to be called your God. And not only that, but he has prepared a place for you, a city, as a reward. What would that do if you began to just own that and walk in that? Not a step-by-step instruction manual, but a certainty in these promises. When I moved to San Diego from Orange County, I moved here to go to school, to go to college, and I didn't know anybody, and I didn't know where I was going to get like plugged into and connected into, but I just knew that God had something for me. I just believed it in faith. I knew I was going to get my economics degree, but I knew that God had a mission for me in San Diego. When I got to the point, I met my wife at UCSC, when I got to the point of realizing that Desiree was the one for me, I just knew it. It was faith. I just knew enough about her, and I believed that our lives, we were going to be in love with each other for the rest of our lives. And so when I made those promises to her, I just believed them in faith. And we've been married for 10 years in January, and I love her more than I ever have. And I believe in faith again that I will love her more and more for the rest of my life. That's just by faith. How does God make a leader who believes and trusts in the promises of God? We're going to spend the next 4 Sundays looking at the life and the story of Moses to figure that out. Well, welcome, y'all, to Grace. My name is Jesse. I love this church. I love you guys, and I'm so thankful, grateful to be your pastor. And so I love you guys. And also, I want you to know, if you're new to Grace, that our hope is that this will be the safest place in San Diego for you to get to know God. And we're maybe not there yet, but we're working towards that. So I hope that you don't feel judged here. I hope you feel safe here and safe with God to get to explore and get to know in a deeper kind of way who God is. We got a new website. It's legit. I just encourage you to check it out. It's simple, clean, all that jazz, HTML5, whatever. And I also want to pump up Perfect Blend, the women's mini retreat coming up, because the struggle is real, right, ladies? And they are going to be talking about real struggles from real stories of women from this church and real answers in the midst of that. So especially if you've never been to something like that before, you should check it out. You can sign up after. Well, we're going to be looking at online campus, welcome you as well. And the ushers are like, come on, Jesse, get to it. Come on down, ushers. We're going to be looking at scripture. And so if some of you got an iPad, iPhone, whatever, you can use that. But some of you like to have ink and paper, which is cool. So raise your hand and the ushers will hook you up with a Bible if you want to follow along that way. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23, page 696 in the House Bible. Now, if you know anything about Moses and his story, you know that the story of Moses really takes place in the book of Exodus, which is like way before Hebrews, like book number 2 in the Bible. Why are we going to Hebrews? Well, Hebrews 11 is kind of like an Old Testament anthology, kind of a catalog of men and women who believed God and were people who had significant faith in God. And most of these people got like a verse devoted to them. Moses got 6. So we're going to look at those 6. And we're also going to be reflecting on Exodus as well. The context of the story that we're going to be looking at in Hebrews 11 is that Abraham is the beginning of the father of the faith for the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, the Israelite nation. He had a son named Isaac, and Isaac had a son named Jacob, and Jacob's name was changed by God to Israel. And Israel had 12 sons. One of those sons was Joseph. And if you've seen Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat or something like that, you know, he ended up in Egypt. And it's a long story, that's for another day, but he had great favor in the eyes of the Egyptian king, the Pharaoh. And because of that, there was a point at which Israel's family, about 70 people, went to Egypt. And because of the favor of Joseph, they had a lot of babies. And they just multiplied. And they greatly increased and flourished up to the millions of people. But in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, I'm going to read it for you. Things change. Check this out. Pay attention. It says, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, 'Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they're going to join our enemies and they're going to fight against us and they're going to escape from our land.' Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves." And then if you skip forward to verse 22 in Exodus 1, it says, "Then Pharaoh commanded all of his people that every son that is born to the Hebrews shall be cast into the Nile." This really happened. I am a father of almost 4 kids. I got nothing on Eric. But over my dead body, right? Over my dead body are you going to touch my kids? And I just imagine in that situation, the screams and the cries and the beating of parents to take the children from them, the chaotic environment in which Moses was born into. Hebrews 11:23 is where we pick up the story. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, right? I would do that. Because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. You see, Moses' faith was built on the faith of his parents. And I know my faith has been built upon the faith of my mother and father, who weren't perfect. But I draw on the faith that they began in me. And for you, you may not have that same story of having faith, parents of faith in God. But guess what you get to do? You get to begin a new legacy of faith for the generation coming after you. They were not afraid of the king's edict. I think it's hard to appreciate that they were not afraid, but it's like this creative, innovative, dynamic, hope-filled faith that his parents had. They okay, what are we going to do? I got an idea. Let's build a basket. Okay, what are we going to do with it? We're going to put our 3-month-old in the basket, and we're going to send him down the Nile. Really? Okay, let's try it. We got no other options. He's getting too loud. And so they send him down, and Pharaoh's daughter picks him up. And it says in Acts 7, verse 20, Moses was born, and he was beautiful in God's sight, and he was brought up for 3 months in his father's house. And when he was exposed, he couldn't stop crying. Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was instructed in all of the wisdom of Egypt. And it's interesting to know that time and space in Egypt, they were like innovative and academically more advanced than I think any other civilization at the time. I mean, the pyramids. He was brought up and instructed in all of that wisdom in the courts of the Egyptian king. And he was mighty in his words and his deeds. He was educated and he was groomed for leadership in a place of significant privilege. I believe that was the providence of God. And God would use those skills for what he had for him in the future. But there was something going on underneath the surface that caused Moses to take a long hiatus because he was not ready to be God's leader. Exodus 2:11 says, "One day when Moses had grown up, he went out his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that. Coast is clear, okay? And he struck down the Egyptian and he hid the Egyptian in the sand. Question, what does it take to murder someone in cold blood? What does it take? I don't know, I haven't experienced it, but I would imagine a lot of aggression and a lot of anger that had been boiling and festering underneath the surface. You see, 90%, I'm realizing that I skipped some stuff that I want to talk about before. We'll get to it later, that's okay. 90% of an iceberg of its volume and mass is underneath the surface. If you're on a boat right here and you're looking at that iceberg, you're like, that's a big iceberg. But you're only seeing 10% of what actually exists. And that iceberg is a lot like you and me. You see, all of us, really focus the majority of our attention on this top 10%. What other people can see are, the techniques and the skills and the cool factor and the social factor. We work on that stuff, the externals, because that's what people see. But reality is not what it appears to be for all of us. And you know what? God is much more concerned with the 90% of your life that is underneath the surface. And he's not as concerned about what other people can see. I want to read between the lines a little bit. In the life of Moses, he, at 40 years old, imagined that his peers, they were all killed. I wonder the population decrease in males that were exactly his age. I wonder if he lived with guilt or questions about why he was alive. He was separated from his family and from his faith, disconnected from his family and faith. He had a confused identity. He didn't really belong in either place. He was a Jewish man, a Hebrew man, being raised in the courts of Egypt. But he didn't really belong there. But he also didn't really belong as a Hebrew because he was raised in the ways of the Egyptians. I wonder if you identify with that, feeling like you live between two worlds. He was a privileged man. And not for everybody that grew up with privilege, but for many, you're raised with high expectations to succeed and to accomplish. And it can often drive these perfectionist tendencies because you're scrutinized for every little detail. For whatever reason, something under the surface in Moses snapped, and he violently reacted and tried to hide his sin in the sand. Don't we do that? Try and bury it. It's not there. No one's going to know. It's all good. But he was exposed. It was seen. And word got to the Pharaoh. And so Moses ran in fear into the desert. One glimpse at the destructive power and the unrefined leadership inside of Moses freaked him out, and he fled into solitude. These are crucial moments in the making and the shaping of the life of a leader for God. These are crucial. When you see under the surface in your life something that freaks you out and scares you. And often it happens because we're exposed. What was hidden can no longer be hidden anymore. And these are moments in our lives that frighten us in a deep way. And we want to run and pretend and make them just go away. And there's a critical choice for God shaping you and making you different in these moments. Hopefully you find a place of the pathway of self-discovery in these moments. It forces you to do whatever it takes to do the hard work necessary to change what's underneath the surface. And I'm the first to tell you, it's not easy to change under the surface kind of stuff. The character, the habits, those kind of things that we kind of go back to, our beliefs, those things take time. But you get to a point where you need to take responsibility for those dark things under the surface that have been driving these behaviors. I've had two critical moments like this in my life. I've had many moments, regularly, where you come face to face with darkness, but two critical moments where I was exposed. And the first was when I was arrested for drugs, for meth. And the second time was when I got caught doing sexually dysfunctional kind of things. And in both those moments, they were painful, scary, wanting to run and hide kind of moments. But they were crucial moments for God to do a deeper inner work in me, to shape me, to be a leader that he wanted me to be. The time comes when these things can no longer be ignored. These moments require faith that rises above personal circumstances into the purposes of God. I believe that it took significant faith for Moses to believe that he was more than an aggressive murderer. That's what he could have identified himself with for the rest of his life. He's a murderer. I believe it took faith to believe that he is not that, but he is a son of God who would see face to face God and who God had called to be his leader in spite of his past. It takes faith for me to believe that I am not my behavior from the long past and from the recent past, but I am his son, called by him. It will take faith for you to believe that you are not your behavior, but you're who God says you are. Moses fled into the desert of Midian, an important place for a leader, for God's leader. For Moses, the desert took time, and it took a lot of safety and a great deal of space to find his way back home again. The desert is a significant place in all of Scripture, if you study it, that this is a place where you are alone with God, a place of solitude with God, a place of brutal honesty and surrender to God, a place where you are so alone that you allow the healer, capital H, God, to heal you deep down beneath the surface. And this cannot happen from your spouse, your friends, your therapist, your pastor, your connect group leader, whoever. Those people are important, absolutely. But the only one who can heal you in your soul deep down is God. God alone can do that. And it is in the place of the desert where you're finally alone and the healer begins to do this work. A leader, this is your first test as a leader, and it requires faith to see God for who he is. He is a healer. He is a forgiver. And he calls the broken to be wounded healers. And not only that, but he will be with you. He will not forsake you in the midst of it. A leader recognizes that this desert place, which once was scary, becomes a place where you regularly are driven back to for solitude with God. See, a leader recognizes, yeah, I was driven there, but I need to go back there because this stuff is hard. And I need this place of solitude to draw on the wellspring of God to nurture and to fill my soul. You see, a leader comes to find the place of the desert to be a beautiful and wonderful place of solitude to go back to. Not because you got to check your devotional off, your list of things to do in the morning, although, that's good to develop those habits. It's a place you need to go because it's hard. And we get dry. And that is where you go to be filled. It's your responsibility to develop that. No one else's. We have a responsibility to teach and to do all those things, but it's the leader's responsibility to find that place of solitude. 40 years in the desert, Moses spent getting real with God. And he returns as a different man, ready to lead. Hebrews 11:24 says, by faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Instead, he chose to be mistreated along with the people of God. I want to identify 3 ways that God changed Moses in the desert over those 40 years. Number 1, by faith, he refused to be identified as the son of Pharaoh, but he chose to be identified with the people of God. He was given the identity of an Egyptian, of Pharaoh's grandson, but it wasn't his true identity. He rejected and refused that place and that community and that identity as the son or in the line of the prince of Egypt. By faith, you will need to choose who you will associate yourself with. The second key to being a leader for God is who you identify with. You need to surround yourself with people who are on this mission with God. There are no other options. So if you're not cool with that, you're not ready, which is fine. But there are no other options. This is the way it is throughout Scripture. Yes, we find this rhythm of alone in solitude with God, but you also find a place where you are surrounded by people who are figuring out God and trying to be on this mission with God and that are opening up faith in each other's lives. He chose the people of God. I had to disassociate myself with my friends who were drug addicts. And my dad helped me realize that, and something clicked in me. And I'm like, yep, that makes sense. Yeah, if I keep hanging out with them, yeah, I'm probably going to keep doing that. And it just made sense. And so, it was quick. And I know it's not always quick, but for me, it was quick. I just dove in. And I just started surrounding myself with people who I looked up to and who were walking this walk, who were just, I was like, can I hang out with you? And it changed me. A leader doesn't wait for it, but a leader goes and finds that place. Let's look at verse 25. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. Moses refused these fleeting pleasures of sin and chose mistreatment. As I was studying this had, for Moses, less to do with like a list of sins of what not to do. Like a checklist. Okay, don't do that, Moses, don't do that. Those are the fleeting pleasures of sin. It really had more to do with what Moses was going to align himself with, either the prince of Egypt or God the king. For him, the sin was, where am I going to choose this pathway of finding the mission, being kind of given the mission of royalty and as a prince of Egypt, or am I going to succumb to the mistreatment that is going to be a part of taking on the mission of God? You must discover for yourself what the mission of God is that he has divinely given you. If you are a follower of Christ, he has given you one. And Moses chose to take on, with incredible mistreatment, the mission of God for his life and reject the rest. We as a church want to help you discover that, but it's really between you and God to discover that. My wife is a mom on a mission. She is. She's a part of a lot of different moms groups at this church. And these are moms on a mission. They have a mission to be incredible moms and to love their husbands. I love those groups. They do. That's they are so welcoming to new moms. And because of that, there are stories, and you're going to hear one about Moms Connect groups in a few weeks. Anyways, of moms who just came to know God and how to become a mom, and they are moms on a mission at the park and all these places. There are hundreds of thousands of college students moving into San Diego right now because school's starting, college students. And I love the work of InterVarsity because I worked for them. It's basically a college ministry. And there are these students who have decided, I am going to take on the mission of God and reach out to these students and let them know that God loves them, that their purpose for being on that campus is more than just getting a degree. I love it. There's the young professional groups here at Grace Church are people on a mission. One of the groups was called this summer Grace at Work, and they studied how to be a light for Christ in the workplace. And not in a weird way where you're freaking people out, whoa, Jesus freak, step back. But in a way that caused curiosity and intrigue. To be a light, to be servants, to shine. And they're trying to figure that out. There are people on a mission. Have you discovered God's mission for you in your life? What he has for you. God has a mission for you. Let's go on to the next one. Moses regarded it disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than all of the treasures of Egypt. The vast values, the treasures of Egypt were legendary. Yet for Moses, he refused that what was given to him, what he could have rightly taken. He refused it because he saw that the treasures of God and that reward was, for some reason, is he crazy? For some reason, that was more important to him. Moses refused the treasures of Egypt and chose disgrace for Christ. You see, Moses had a lot of time in the desert to really reflect on what was truly valuable, what was truly important. And there was a shift in Moses, and I identify with that. I spent 6 weeks in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, before I went into my senior year at UCSD. And I spent 6 weeks eating injera and durawat and working in this orphanage, and it was difficult and wonderful as I taught these kids English and just played with them and was there every day with these kids. And something shifted in me while I was there. My drive up until that point was really, if I was going to be honest with you, was money. I was an economics major. I was planning on getting my MBA and making a lot of money. And there's nothing wrong with making a lot of money. I would love to get my MBA still one day. I'm still on the fence of what I want to do with school in the future. Anyways, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a matter of what is driving me. What was my purpose? What was I truly valuing? And there was a shift in me. I began to value what God valued. You want to know what God values? The one thing on this earth that will never come to an end. It's people. You and I have no end. We will exist for all of eternity. Everything else is going to have an end. God has created every single person as his beloved. And God values people. And how we treat them and what they believe matters. The faith of a leader begins to shift their values to begin to value what God values. When Moses left the desert after 40 years, so he's 80. Is God patient? Yep. When he was 80, his greatest adversary was still yet to come. The faith of a leader overcomes adversity with fearless strength. You want to know what Moses' biggest adversity was? Same that you have and I have. It's people. People. We are afraid of what people think of us. And that keeps us. Because here's the thing. We try and impress them and we try and want to we want to, make them approve of us. But then their voices stay in our heads. And you know what that does is it silences the voice of God. And what you need and what I need to be a leader for God is to let his voice be the loudest voice in your head, in our hearts. Moses ran from Egypt the first time afraid of Pharaoh. And in the desert, he became a changed man. Not a perfect man, mind you. He's a flawed man still. And we're going to study those flaws over the next 3 weeks. That he was a reluctant leader. He was a overworked leader. And he was an impulsive leader. He still had flaws. He was still imperfect. But something changed. He had a faith in God that he didn't have before. He heard God's voice and he trusted it. The second time leaving Egypt, by faith, he left Egypt not fearing the king's anger as he had before, but he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. From fear to a fearlessness of man. That is a powerful shift in the life of a leader that God wants to use. Because Moses shifted what he was afraid of. The engine for Moses' life was now God. That was the thing driving him. I'll never forget when I was in line at Thea Lacey to get checked into jail. It was by the Block in Orange. I don't know if you've ever seen that place. Anyways, I was in line and I had my Bible in my hand because it took 6 months for the trial to end. or whatever. It was a court thing. I hired a lawyer. I didn't even go. Anyways, and I had already given my life to Christ, and it had been about 5 months. And I'll never forget, before you go through the loop and you have to like give him everything and then put on the new suit, I had my Bible in my hand. And I read, I think for the first time, or at least it was the first time that it struck me, Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. Let me read it for you. Do not be afraid of the one who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul. And when I read that, I believed it in faith. I just trusted, okay, obviously people can hurt me in there or out here. People can hurt me, but why would I be afraid of them? How much more should I be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul? And when he has got my back and he is with me, why do I need to be afraid of people? I read that and it shifted my fear of man. And I had this new sense of courage and ability to love people. I get to work with a lot of leaders at this church. I don't work so much with outreach, although I would love to do that. I don't work so much with the kids programs and the youth. I'm so glad I don't work with that. I'm glad for those of you that do, thank you. But I get to work with the adults of this church, adult ministry, connect groups. And I am regularly talking to leaders at this church who one recently emailed me and said, I have butterflies in my stomach, Jesse, for what you're asking me to do. Week after week, I don't feel like I know enough, Jesse. Do you know my story? Do you know what I've done and where I've been? And I love helping people wrestle with God through these moments because I've been there and I understand, and I'm helping them be stretched by God and being used by God and helping them like let fear have less and less power over their lives so God can use them in a more powerful way. I want to live the rest of my life with that pit in my stomach. God, what you are asking me to do right now, I'm overwhelmed by it. It feels too big, God. I don't think I can do this. God, if I'm going to do this, you're going to need to show up, God, because I can't do this on my own. If I ever get to the point where I feel like, man, I can do this, no problem. Ain't no thing. This is easy. For God, I'm not following God. I'm not dependent on God. I'm not in a place where God is stretching me, not to use more time, because God doesn't want me to burn out, but to depend on him and draw on him more so I can be more impactful for him, to trust in him more. To do this, you got to get out of the bleachers and get into the game. It's the only way. And faith like this inspires people. Verse 29 says, by faith the people, it's no longer Moses, but the people passed through the Red Sea. You see, God gave Moses a vision in Exodus chapter 3, which we're going to study next week, to deliver his people out of Egypt and into the promised land, into freedom. And Moses believed that in faith, and he went to the Jewish nation and said, hey guys, God is going to set you free. And I believe it. And Moses' faith inspired faith in other people. The faith of a leader shows people a preferred future. Yes, we are here. I get it. We are trapped by the persecution and the slavery of Egypt, but God is going to deliver us here. This is where we're going. He casted that vision and painted that picture. I'll never forget when I went to Unleashed, this sexual integrity conference in San Diego at a church. And I realized I need to get myself in an FMO group, a for men only group, a sexual integrity group. We actually have one at this church. Some of you may need to go. Because I know, because I've been there. And after the conference, I went to one of the FMO group leaders. His name is James. And this was like a passing conversation, and he probably doesn't even remember it, but I do, because I was at a place where I felt hopeless, where I felt this was never going to change. And the things, I won't get into it, I just felt like it was never going to change. And James said just a few words that I'll never forget. He said, Jesse, there is hope. And I believed him, because I could just see in his eyes that he had been through the desert himself, and he had experienced God that healed him. And those words from his, just in passing, struck me and opened up something in me to believe that God can do something new in my life. Number one, leaders cast vision of a preferred future. Number two, leaders make things better. They fix things that are broken. You're going to innovate, and you're going to try new things. You're going to do things that no one else is doing to reach people who are not being reached. And guess what? We're probably going to upset some people in the process. Some religious people who are like, you can't do that. Watch me. Because we're going to do stuff. We're compelled to do something about it. We can't sit back where there are people who are hurting and God is the only one that can heal them. There are people who need to be forgiven by God because that really matters for their future eternity. There are households and families and fathers who are upside down and who God needs to turn right side up. It is not should we reach people, but we have to reach people for Christ. And I love the way one pastor puts it. We will do anything short of sin to make this happen. God's leaders are not perfect. We are flawed, but we have faith in a big God, and we're going to make mistakes along the way. But the starting point of a leader is to have faith and believe in God. Faith that sees the invisible God instead of the present circumstances. You want to know a test, like a litmus test of your faith, how big your clutch is? When you sense God speaking into your heart, speaking into you, and you're like, okay, God, yep, right now, I'm going to do it. If you say, when I have kids and I need to bring them to church, then I'll start taking God seriously. Or, when my life is busy, and maybe when my kids get older, that is not faith. Faith says, God, I hear you speaking to me right now, and I'm going to say yes to you. It begins with faith in Jesus. I like to call him God with clothes on. Jesus is God in the flesh. He came and he died and he rose on the cross, rose from the dead. Because the starting point of access and a relationship with God is forgiveness from God. You need to be forgiven by him. And we're going to pray right now. And I'm going to lead us in a prayer with all of our eyes closed and our heads bowed. And if you need that from God, God will hear your prayer. You don't have to say it out loud, in the quietness of your own heart. And he will respond and come into your life and check it out. You won't have any idea what he's going to do. He's going to change your life. Let's bow our heads and pray.